Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 514, and today is December 18th, 2023. Thank you all so much for tuning into the show today. We got a lot of news to cover. First, I want to remind everyone that we are holding our end of the year fundraiser at the Libertarian Institute. Right now, we are over halfway to meeting our goal. I know a lot of the contributions have come from people within this audience. So, for all of you who have, made a donation to the Institute, huge appreciation for what you're doing. If you haven't yet, we are a tax deductible organization. It's the end of the year, so figure out what you could donate so you could pay less money to the government and you can send some of that money to us. And it's the perfect time to do it because right now we do have matching funds at the institute, so the impact of your donation will be doubled if you make one. Again, if you can donate, really appreciate it. I know times could be tough, especially around the holidays. We're also all doing a lot of last minute Christmas shopping and things like that. So if all you could do is share this show, share the word about the fundraiser, I'd really appreciate that as well. And with that, let's get into the news today. The first story up here. House passes $886 billion National Defense Authorization Act. On Thursday, the House passed the $886 billion 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, which funds the Pentagon and some military spending for government agencies. The NDAA has already been passed by the Senate and now heads to President Biden's desk. A couple very significant things a part of this NDAA. One is it includes a provision to extend Section 702 of the FISA Act, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows mass warrantless surveillance of Americans. U.S. government agencies portray the law as designed to target foreigners outside the U.S., but it has the collection of any communications they have with Americans, including emails and text messages. I know one thing that some members of Congress, I think Massey was really one of the front runners on this, is that they really were trying to get 702 so that let's say you have an FBI agent, right, or somebody who wants to investigate some crime in the US. So they wanted it so they would need a warrant to access that information that's collected under FISA, where right now they really don't. They could go ahead and look at that information, and we have something called parallel construction where they're able to use that information, which should be inadmissible in court and problematic because it was obtained without a warrant. However, they do something called parallel construction, which allows them to use that information to develop cases against people. Also within there is $300 million for Ukraine, which isn't very much money. If you could, kind of consider big picture, that's probably a couple weeks worth of weapons for the U.S. to send to Ukraine. So a couple of things. I think it could be significant in that the House was saying that they weren't going to come back until the new year to talk about Ukraine aid, which would mean that the White House would probably run out of aid before Congress passed more aid, which wasn't going to necessarily just like pull the plug out from the Ukrainian life raft immediately, because there are European weapons that could flow into Ukraine. And I'm sure the White House could, figure out ways to smuggle a little bit around Congress into Ukraine. However, that $300 million, the White House was projecting that they're going to run out of aid within the next couple of weeks. And so it could extend it out a week or two. And that would give Congress the first couple weeks of the new year to pass a new Ukraine aid bill without running out of previous funding. And then one more thing in here, the NDAA includes several amendments to fund U.S. and allied military buildup in the Indo-Pacific that's aimed at China. One amendment allows the Pentagon to transfer 3 nuclear-powered Virginia-class submarines to Australia as a part of the AUKUS military pact the U.S., Britain, and Australia signed in 2021 to prepare for a future war with China. So I'm guessing I'll have more breakdown on the NDAA. For anybody who is on Twitter, there was a pretty viral tweet by Mike Lee of a couple staffers pushing on what looks like a bellhop cart at a hotel that's pretty full. The actual text of the bill, thousands and thousands of pages. And so it's going to take myself and Dave DeCamp and others in the independent media some time to go through this legislation to kind of pick out all of the really nefarious things that have been put in there. But I think a couple of the big ones are the AUKUS stuff, the 702, and the Ukraine military funding. So next up here, article I wrote for antiwar.com, Guyana and Venezuela agree not to use military force to resolve territorial dispute. So this seems like some really good news. Guyana and Venezuela signed an agreement that said they would not threaten or use force against one another in any circumstances to resolve their dispute to a contested region. The talks came after the Brazilian government pressured both nations. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and Guyanese President Ali met in Kingstown, St. Vincent and the Grenadines for talks hosted by Brasilia and the United Nations. The discussion centered on the disputed region of Guyana. It makes up about 2/3 of the country, and the most important part is the offshore oil. I think that's kind of, everybody kind of agrees that that's why this territorial dispute is going on right now. I think the region is fairly remote and jungle, Amazon rainforest, territory. And so I'm not sure how much value there is in the land. I'm sure it's not worthless or anything like that. I'm not trying to suggest that. I'm sure there's people that live there that have opinions on this, but I think the real concern for both parties involved is the offshore oil. The South American neighbors inked a 3-page agreement that emphasized that the dispute over the region will not be resolved by force. The deal says that both nations agree not to threaten or use force against one another in any circumstances, and agree and refrain, whether by word or deeds, from escalating any conflict. The agreement was the result of an excellent day of dialogue, according to Maduro. I thank the president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Ali, for his candor and willingness to engage in broad dialogue on all issues addressed directly. I am satisfied to have been face to face as I wanted for a long time. It is worth it to raise the flag of truth, to raise our historic reasons and seek the Bolivarian peace diplomacy, the path of dialogue and understanding to channel this historic controversy. So, hopefully we will see the benefits of diplomacy here. That this not only starts in an agreement not to use force, but really continues to develop in that way. So far, good to see. The Venezuelan X account posted, handshake seals the willingness of Venezuela and Guyana to continue dialogue in order to resolve the controversy in relation to the disputed region. The two countries agreed to meet again in Brazil. The Prime Minister of St. Vincent and Grenadines said resolving the dispute would take several rounds of talks. The Guyanese leader emphasized he is currently unwilling to make any territorial concessions. All of this belongs to Guyana, Ali said during a break in negotiations. Guyana is not seeking war, but Guyana reserves the right to work with all of our partners to ensure the defense of our country. The U.S. has signaled support for Guyana by announcing joint military drills that Venezuela slammed as provocative. U.S. Southern Command has conducted flight operations in Guyana during recent days. So good to see, although the U.S. is still acting a little provocative and could certainly set something up. Few stories here on Ukraine. Senate to return next week to work on border deal to get Ukraine aid. So this was written by Dave DeCamp last week. So this week, as of Monday, the 18th, when I'm recording the show, is the week the Senate will be in session. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has decided to keep senators in town next week to continue negotiations on a border deal that will unlock a massive $111 billion spending package that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The Senate holiday recess was set to start on Friday, but Schumer is delaying it as he says negotiations are progressing. Schumer's quote, the Senate will return on Monday. That will give negotiators from the White House, Senate Democrats, and Senate Republicans time to work through the weekend in an effort to reach a framework agreement. House Speaker Mike Johnson decided to adjourn his chamber for the holidays, meaning if the Senate does reach a deal, the bill cannot be finalized until after the new deal. Johnson said the House will not wait around and debate a rushed product. Schumer vowed there would be a vote on the military aid package next week. No matter what, members should be aware that we will vote on a supplemental proposal next week, he said. Isn't this amazing, too, that Congress just passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which is supposed to be the military spending bill, and the next week they're working on a package that is, 15% of the size of the total bill. And so it seems like the Senate just really didn't want to pass, and the House and the Senate really didn't want to pass $1 trillion NDAA, which is how this should have probably been all packaged together and set up. Republicans are looking for significant changes to immigration laws to make it harder for immigrants to enter the country, and there are signs that President Biden is willing to give them what they want to secure over $60 billion. He wants to fund the proxy war in Ukraine for another year. CBS News reported to the White House indicated that Congress would support a new immigration restrictions, including giving border officials the authority to expel migrants without processing them as asylum claims, and dramatic expansion of deportations and detentions. And, I don't like to get into the border debate on this show. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of different factors there what we could talk about. However, I think it's really disappointing here, especially that the Republicans, if they're really concerned about the Ukraine stuff and the war with Russia that some of them claim to be, I think the focus should really be there, and not only trying to rein in and maybe prevent any Ukraine aid from getting passed, or should it be passed, at the very least make sure that there is a lot of oversight of that aid, and in fact oversight of the past aid that we have sent Ukraine. That could be huge in exposing President Biden and making him look really bad and really corrupt. But the Republicans seem more focused on the immigration issue, which is a little disappointing. All right, next up here. Congress approves bill to prevent any president from leaving NATO. Patent to the 2024 NDAA that has been approved by the House and the Senate is an amendment designed to prevent any future president from withdrawing from NATO. Of course, is directed at the idea that maybe Trump or Vivek or somebody who is anti-NATO gets elected. I don't think either of them are really anti-NATO. I don't think either of them will withdraw from NATO, but it's the insecurity of the war state that they feel they have to do this that I find so interesting. All right, next up here. Putin claims Biden's claim that Russia will attack NATO is nonsense. So Russian President Vladimir Putin dismissed Biden's claim that Russia will attack NATO territory if it wins the war in Ukraine, calling the idea nonsense. So Biden said in a speech, if Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, if he keeps going, then he attacked a NATO ally. Well, we've committed to, as a NATO member, that we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Then we will have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today: American troops fighting against Russian troops, American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Sorry, I know that statement was a little confusing, but I always think it's kind of helpful to just read president's statements as they read. This is especially true with our last two, Trump and Biden, just because they say some wild stuff in the margins. Responding to the claim, Putin said he had no interest in fighting NATO. He said, "It's complete nonsense, and I think President Biden understands that. Russia has no reason to or interest, no geopolitical interest, neither economic, political, or military to fight with the U.S. and NATO countries." So, this is, I think, probably the correct situation, even if, you really believe, Putin really just wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union and this is his plan. I think if you look at, just logistically how poorly Russia has done in Ukraine, and I don't mean poorly in that they're losing the war, but poorly in they have certainly not gotten what they wanted at the price they were initially hoping to pay for it. They've lost a lot of troops, a lot of soldiers, committed years of time. They probably completely split the, history of the Russian and the Ukrainian people, at least for generations to come. These are massive prices that Putin is paying here. So I don't think there's really any indication that he's, looking to go into Poland next or another NATO state. All right, couple things on North Korea here. This I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on December 17th. U.S. nuclear submarine arrives in South Korea. An American nuclear submarine arrived in South Korea for the third time this year. Shortly after the warship arrived in South Korea, North Korea fired a short-range ballistic missile. On Sunday, Yonhap News reported that the Virginia-class submarine, the USS Missouri, arrived at the South Korean port. In July, the Pentagon had an Ohio-class attack submarine, a warship equipped with nuclear weapons, make a port call in South Korea. Last month, a Los Angeles-class nuclear submarine made a stop at the Korean Peninsula. So a couple things here. When it comes to nuclear submarines, they could be anywhere. Part of the reason that these submarines are so critical to American defense and war planning and everything like that is they, really are very, very capable weapon systems that can fire a lot of missiles, do a lot of damage, but are also very, very hard to track. And so they could essentially be anywhere at any time unless the U.S. announces where they are. And so, I'm sure North Korea always assumes that they have to be prepared for an attack from an American nuclear-powered submarine. But whenever the Americans are using them to make port calls in South Korea, it's not about the military strategy of, having the submarine there. It's assigned to North Korea, and we will get into what that sign means with the statement the Biden administration issued. So, shortly before the Missouri arrived in South Korea, the Biden administration issued a statement reaffirming it will use nuclear weapons to defend Seoul. The U.S. reaffirms its unwavering commitment to provide extended deterrence to South Korea, backed by the full range of U.S. capabilities, including nuclear. And then the attack continued. The statement continues. Any nuclear attack by North Korea against the United States or its allies is unacceptable and will result in the end of the Kim regime. And the U.S. reiterated that any nuclear attack by North Korea against South Korea will be met by a swift, overwhelming, and decisive response. The deployments have drawn Pyongyang's sharp criticism. In response to the USS Missouri arriving in South Korea, the Ministry of National Defense of North Korea issued a statement slamming the U.S. and South Korea as military gangsters. The U.S. and the military gangsters of the Republic of Korea, who have aggravated the situation in the Korean Peninsula with their reckless military provocations, such as the deployment of nuclear strike mines and large-scale joint military drills throughout this year, are going to finish the end of the year with a preview of nuclear war. Clear is the intention of the U.S., which dispatched the nuclear-powered submarine Missouri to the Korean Peninsula as soon as it hatched a dangerous plot for nuclear war in Washington. Pyongyang additionally conducted a ballistic missile test after the Missouri's arrival. The short-range missile was fired from near Pyongyang and landed in the ocean. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula have skyrocketed since President Biden took office and relaunched provocative military drills and strategic weapons deployments with Seoul. Pyongyang views the myriad of U.S. military exercises as preparation for regime change war in North Korea. All right, now let's get into the news on the war in Gaza situation in Israel overall here too. Netanyahu says he's proud of preventing a Palestinian state. And I think this is so important, right? Remember that the U.S. policy here is that we have to support Israel to get to a two-state solution. That the reason that the U.S. gives all this support for Israel is really in the end about making sure that Israel is safe so we could have a two-state solution develop. And here we have the, most influential Israeli politician maybe ever, due to like the length of time he's been in control of the country, but certainly over the past 2 decades, saying that distinctly Israel's goal is the opposite of what the United States wants. So, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he's proud of preventing the creation of a Palestinian state. His quote, "I'm proud that I prevented the establishment of a Palestinian state because today everybody understands that the Palestinian state could have been, and we've seen the little Palestinian state in Gaza," Netanyahu said. The Israeli leader has come under intense domestic criticism due to his strategy of helping prop up Hamas in Gaza to prevent a Palestinian state and the intelligence failure that allowed the October 7th attack on southern Israel to happen. In the face of pressure, Netanyahu has reportedly pitched himself to fellow Likud party members as the only one who could prevent a Palestinian state. Netanyahu also said that he would not let the state of Israel go back to the fateful mistake of Oslo, referring to the 1993 Oslo Accords, which signed between the Israel and Palestinian Liberalization Organization, the PLO, which established the Palestinian Authority, the PA, and were meant to pave the way for a lasting peace deal. Comments from Netanyahu came as Biden administration officials continued to insist that his two-state solution must be reached in Gaza after the war, despite clear opposition from Israeli officials. The Israeli ambassador to the UK told Sky News last week that there is absolutely no chance of a two-state solution. The Biden administration has said it wants the PA to take over Gaza, an idea the Netanyahu government has outright rejected. The Palestinian Authority is also extremely unpopular among Palestinians. A recent poll of Palestinians found that nearly 90% want PA President Mohammed Abbas to resign, and he has overstayed the welcome from his election for years and years now. I'm not quite sure when he was elected and when his mandate to rule was supposed to end, but I mean, we are several years past that now. And again, it's just wild how we had the Biden administration saying that they need to continue to arm Israel in order to create the two-state solution when Israel is taking those arms and explicitly saying they're going to use them to prevent a two-state solution. All right, next up here, Biden admin staffers hold rally calling for a ceasefire outside of the White House. The protesting staffers concealed their identity with masks and sunglasses. Josh Paul, a former State Department official who resigned in October over the administration's weapons transfers to Israel, attended the rally. He said, "We're horrified by the brutal October 7th attack on Israeli civilians, and we have been horrified by the disproportionate response by the Israeli government, which has indiscriminately killed thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza and displaced over 1 million more. We have seen refugee camps, hospitals, schools, and entire neighborhoods bombed. We've seen dead men, women, and children pulled from the rubble in their pajamas. We have seen harassment, humiliation, and degradation of many kinds. This is unacceptable. The American people and respected institutions like the United Nations are pleading for a ceasefire, but this administration has yet to listen. We are demanding President Biden and members of his cabinet speak up, call for a permanent ceasefire and release of all hostages, and an immediate de-escalation now." And you can see here, if you're watching, a picture of the protesters. I guess a couple interesting things I just want to mention here. One is that the White House has apparently allowed Kamala Harris to have a larger hand in the policy, or at least publicly, and talking about the policy. So I'm not quite sure what that means. There's some reports that she's less hawkish on this issue than Biden. I have no idea if that's true or not. It could easily be that the White House thinks that, in the same way sending Kamala Harris to South America to tell the people not to come, identity politics wise, it just plays better to American progressives if you have a woman of color kind of being the face of this policy rather than Joe Biden. Another thing here too is Israel put out more revised numbers on the October 7th attack, and the number of civilians killed is under 700, and the number of soldiers killed was about 350. And so, just a couple interesting things there. One, the number of civilians killed is half of the initial number of civilians that was reported to have been killed, which was 1,400. And as I always point out on the show, I think, once you get over even 20 or so people being killed in a certain situation. Um, I'm not sure how much the numbers really matter, right? It's hard to like, do you really empathize differently with people if 700 people versus 1,400 people are dead? Like, so I'm not trying to say that this really changes the horrors or anything like that about October 7th. I think it does change in some ways some of the things that like the American propaganda machine was putting out, that this was 15 9/11s and things like that. So you do have to like scale that back and realize that proportionally it wasn't as catastrophic as initially presented. But another thing here is that you have to realize is about 2/3, half to 2/3, it seems, of the people that were killed by Hamas on October 7th. And again, not every civilian killed there was killed by Hamas. We do know at least some portion of the civilians, maybe around 100 or so, were killed by the IDF. And so you're looking, and it turns out that about, maybe a half to 2/3 of the people that were killed on October 7th were civilians that were killed by Hamas. 2/3 being the most, a half, maybe a little bit less if you really say that some of the people that were killed in almost intentionally by the Israelis. They said that rather than trying to suss out who's Hamas and who's an Israeli citizen, we'll just kill them all and let God sort it out. The Hannibal doctrine policy there, that rather than having the other side take captives and the Israelis negotiate, they just kill everyone. That way they don't have to deal with that. And so if you take out some of those deaths that were just, people killed by Israeli fighters, you may find that, close to or around 50% of the people, the civilians that were killed, are people that were killed by Hamas. About half were soldiers and half were civilians. If you look at the numbers that Israel is killing in Gaza, it's probably around 70% are civilians. Women and children make up 70%. And then when you try to figure out the percentage of men that are fighters versus those who are just innocent civilians killed, I mean, you could be looking at 80+% of the people being killed in Gaza are civilians. And so if what Hamas did in Israel is terrorism, then what do you call what Israel is doing in Gaza? All right, next up here, U.S. pushing Hezbollah to withdraw from Lebanon-Israeli border. Washington, and I wrote this for antiwar.com on December 15th. Washington and its allies are pressuring Hezbollah to withdraw from the Lebanon-Israel border to reduce tensions. An Israeli Defense Forces official recently explained to Newsweek that Tel Aviv is preparing for war in Lebanon, but does not want to conduct operations at this time. According to the Financial Times, the US, UK, and France are exploring ways to convince Hezbollah to pull back from the Israel-Lebanon border in diplomatic push to prevent a full-blown conflict from erupting between the militant group and Israel. A Western diplomat said, "You need to get Israel and Hezbollah to stop fighting first. You need to get Hezbollah to acquiesce." Hezbollah and the IDF had traded fire regularly since October 7th. Hezbollah's leader said the group's goal is to prevent Israel from unleashing its full military strength on the Palestinians. And so they're saying that the military activity in northern Israel is basically forcing Israel to commit a large portion of its forces to the north, and that is pulling resources away from the south. And so, a couple things here. What the West is doing is not in any way, I think, really looking for confrontation. This is just more appeasement of Tel Aviv, but really it's going to lead to more conflict, because the first thing it's going to do is it's going to allow Israel to reposition more assets to South Israel and be more brutal to the Palestinians there. But then, as we'll see, I think the overall goal is actually to redeploy north. So Western nations, let's see. Israel has killed civilians, journalists, and Palestinians in southern Lebanon. Israeli forces have also used American-provided white phosphorus against its neighbor to the north. The U.S. has ratified Protocol 3 of the International Treaty, which bans the use of such incendiaries, but Israel has not. The Western nations are also presenting their proposal for implementing UN Resolution 1701. 1701 calls for Hezbollah to withdraw from a large region of southern Lebanon between the border and the Litani River. A Lebanese official told Financial Times that 1701 could be a framework for an agreement, but there are several hurdles to overcome. The Lebanese official says what the Israelis are trying to do is use the war in Gaza to try to preempt us or pressure us. It won't work. So what they are saying is, let's think constructively, put 701 on the table and see who's violating it, and let's try to reinvigorate its implementation. Beirut explains that Israel violates 1701 by using Lebanese airspace to attack Syria, and they do this pretty routinely. Another issue for Beirut is the relative weakness of the Lebanese army compared to Hezbollah. And so think about this. The U.S. is going to push Hezbollah to pull back, Lebanon's most effective fighting force, to pull back from the border with Israel and put a less effective fighting force in there. And then in a couple months, this is what the IDF wants to do. And IDF officials signaled that Israel is preparing for a war with Hezbollah. The official told Newsweek, "We will not return to the situation that was on October 6th in the north. It means we will not allow our civilians neither in Gaza envelope nor near the Lebanese border to be under this threat. We are prepared for that. We are on alert for that. And we have the people, the personnel that are ready for that, but we don't want to do that yet." And so that yet is very important, that they want to resolve the situation in Gaza first, take care of their Palestinians, and then look at taking out Hezbollah or fighting a war with Hezbollah afterwards. All right. Next up here from Day to Camp, antiwar.com, pressure mounts on Netanyahu to reach new deal with Hamas after IDF killed 3 Israeli hostages. The Israeli government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is coming under increasing domestic pressure to reach a new hostage deal with Hamas after the Israeli military mistakenly killed 3 Israelis who escaped captivity in Gaza. Israeli troops in Gaza shot the 3 Israeli hostages while the escapees were shirtless, waving a white flag. 2 died immediately, and the 3rd was wounded and sought shelter in a nearby building. He cried out for help in Hebrew before being shot again and killed. At a funeral for one of the victims, a family member said he was abandoned and murdered by the Israeli military. "Those who abandoned you and also murdered you, after all that you did right," the victim's brother said. Family members of Israeli hostages in Gaza met with Netanyahu's war cabinet on Saturday. They called for Israel to cease its current operations and work towards another deal with Hamas. More than 100 Israeli women and children were released as a result of the deal with Hamas. Over 300 Israelis remain captive in Gaza, although some are dead. Netanyahu's government faced backlash after it was revealed that the war cabinet blocked Mossad chief from restarting hostage negotiations in Qatar, where Hamas's political leaders are based. But now it appears that diplomacy has resumed, as the Mossad chief did get permission, the green light, to go to Qatar at the end of last week. And then, despite calls for growing diplomacy, Netanyahu said on Sunday that he would vow to keep military operations going. He said the brutal assault on Gaza will continue to the very end until there will be no authority that will continue training for terror in Gaza. After we have eradicated Hamas and Gaza will be demilitarized under the control of Israel, there will be no one who will educate their children to annihilate Israel, Netanyahu said. The U.S. backed Israel's onslaught that has killed 19,000 Palestinians so far, including over 7,500 children. Gaza's healthcare system is shattered, and many Palestinians are now starving and suffering from disease due to the Israeli siege. And we have the Israeli defense minister saying that this is going to continue for several months. The Israeli defense minister Gallant on Thursday told U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in televised remarks that Israel's brutal assault on Gaza will continue for more than several months. Sullivan traveled to Israel to discuss a timetable for the war, but there are signs that the Biden administration wants Israel to wrap things up more quickly, but the Israelis have shown no interest in taking the U.S. advice. Hamas is a terrorist organization that built itself over a decade to fight Israel, and they built infrastructure under the ground and above the ground, and it's not easy to destroy them, Gallant told Sullivan before a closed-door meeting. It will take time and require a long period of time. It will last more than several months, but we will win and we will destroy them. So thank you so much again for coming to Israel. Thank you for helping us and for supporting us. Again, like the first story we talked about on the Israel situation, it's just wild that the Israelis are able to receive so much support from the White House while doing the exact opposite of what the White House is asking. All right, next up here. Nearly half of all Israeli munitions dropped on Gaza are imprecise dumb bombs. This from Day-to-Camp, antiwar.com. CNN reported on Thursday that nearly half of all air-to-ground munitions Israel has dropped on the Gaza Strip are unguided or dumb bombs, citing a U.S. intelligence assessment. The report said that Israel has used 29,000 air-to-ground munitions in the bombardment of Gaza, a total that does not include artillery shells and tank munitions that are also being fired on the Strip. The assessment from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence found that 40 to 45% of the munitions have been dumb bombs and the rest have been precise guided munitions. Unguided munitions are less precise and generally considered more of a threat to kill civilians, but Israel is also slaughtering civilians with precision guided munitions. A report from Plus 972 magazine revealed that Israel is purposely targeting civilian areas and launching strikes that might kill one Hamas commander, knowing hundreds of civilians will still be killed. Amnesty International conducted an investigation that found that Israel targeted 2 homes in Gaza full of civilians using JDAMs, U.S. provided kits that turned dumb bombs into precision guided munitions. The strikes killed 40 people, including 19 civilians, children, and Amnesty International is calling for this to be investigated as a war crime. Next up here, a statement from the Pope. Pope Francis condemns Israel's terrorism after IDF kills 2 women at Catholic Church in Gaza. Pope Francis on Sunday condemned an Israeli attack on the Catholic Church in Gaza as terrorism. The Latin Parachute in Jerusalem, the Catholic authority in the region, said Saturday that the Holy Family Church's compound in Gaza City was under Israeli bombardment and that IDF snipers killed 2 women on the grounds. A sniper of the IDF murdered 2 Christian women inside the Holy Family Parish in Gaza, where the majority of Christian families have taken refuge since the start of the war. The two women, an elderly woman and her daughter, were shot and killed while walking to a nun convent on the grounds of the parish, and 7 more people were wounded by gunfire. No warning was given, no notification was provided. They were shot in cold blood inside the premise of the parish, where there were no belligerents, the patriarch said. And then continued that earlier in the day, IDF tank fire targeted the convent of the Sisters of Mother Teresa on the parish grounds, where 54 disabled persons live. The Israeli attack destroyed the building generator, and it's the only source of electricity, as well as its fuel and water reserves. The tank fire left the home uninhabitable, and 54 people who live there are currently displaced and without access to respirators that some of them need to survive. According to Vatican News, Israelis have claimed a rocket launcher is present at the church, but according to Catholic authorities, they say there were only unarmed civilians on the compound. Pope Francis said the parish grounds, there are no terrorists, but families, children, people who are sick and have disabilities, and nuns, and that in Gaza, unarmed civilians are the target of bombings and gunfire. The Pope named the 2 Christian women who were killed, and said, some say this is terrorism, this is war. Yes, it is war, it is terrorism. He said, that's why the scripture affirms God stops wars, breaks the bow, splinters the spear, and lets us pray to the Lord for peace. So, this is important. Not that the, two Christian women being killed should really compare to all the slaughter that has been done of, the Arab Muslim Palestinians that live in Gaza. But at the same time, having the Pope issue this condemnation may start to wake up some more Christians to the travesties being committed in Gaza. All right. Israeli town council head says Israel should make Gaza look like Auschwitz. And this is just another, we've had all these Israeli officials, so many people within the Israeli government, and from Netanyahu and his top ministers on down, who have now made genocidal comments about what should happen to the people of Gaza. And this is just another example. So, according to the Jerusalem Post, the head of the northern Israeli town of Medulla said, then a security strip should be established from the sea to the Gaza border fence, completely empty, as a reminder of once was what's there. It should resemble the Auschwitz concentration camp. Tell everyone in Gaza to go to the beaches. Navy ships should load the terrorists onto the shores of Lebanon. The entire Gaza Strip should be empty and leveled flat, just like Auschwitz. Let it become a museum showcasing the capabilities of the state of Israel and dissuading anyone living in the Gaza Strip. This is what must be done. Give them a visual representation. And I'm a little confused because does he see Auschwitz as like a symbol of German Nazi power? And is he admitting that the Israelis are committing a genocide and that they're the Third Reich in this situation? I'm not sure. All right, next up here are a couple stories on Yemen. The first one I wrote for antiwar.com. Houthis attack cargo ship in Red Sea, causing a fire. The Houthis conducted 2 attacks on cargo ships in the Red Sea. One vessel was hit with a projectile, causing a fire, but the crew suffered no injuries. The Houthis had carried out a series of operations against ships near Yemen over the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. The increased risks to shipping have led to a major shipping company halting transit through the Red Sea. The Houthis' first attack on Friday targeted Al Jarrah, a Liberian fled cargo ship. The projectile was fired at the ship, causing a fire. A U.S. official believes the Houthis fired a drone at the ship, but there are no reports of injuries to the crew members, and it wasn't clear what type of projectile hit the ship. A marine security company described the incident as the projectile reportedly hit the port side of the vessel and one container fell overboard due to the impact. The projectile caused a fire on the deck, which was broadcast via radio. A second ship was warned that a small boat carrying Houthi fighters was approaching, causing the vessel to take evasive maneuvers. The marine security company said the ship was approached by a small craft who declared themselves to be Yemeni authorities. The statement said that the Yemeni authorities instructed the ship, "Captain, you are now allowed to proceed through the Red Sea. Alter your course to the south side now." The Houthis have not commented on either incident, at least not as of the time I wrote the article. I should have looked, but I don't think I saw anything from the Houthis on these 2 particular ships. The Houthis have attacked over 10 ships since Israel began its military operations in Gaza. The Houthis say they are targeting ships with connections to Israel to pressure Israel to end its military operations in Gaza. Following the attack on the Al Jarrah, major shipping company told AP that the firm elected to halt shipments through the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, a waterway linking the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea. Following the near-miss incident today involving the Maersk Gibraltar yesterday, and yet another attack on a container vessel today, we have instructed all vessels in the area bound to pass through the Bab al-Mandeb Strait to pause their journey until further notice. Nearly 10% of all oil traded at sea passes through the strait. Washington is demanding the Houthis stop attacks. The U.S. is seeking to form a multinational coalition to least the Red Sea. A Houthi spokesman said, "There is no way of preventing the escalation except by moving towards a permanent ceasefire in Gaza." Last week, the U.S. asked Israel not to attack Yemen directly. Tel Aviv appears willing to ignore Washington and has said threatened to use force against the Houthis if the attacks continue. On Tuesday, a spokesperson for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said regarding the Houthi attacks on international cargo ships, these attacks pose a threat to international trade and Israel, and this threat will be dealt with by force. For over a year, a fragile truce has held in Yemen between the ruling Houthis and the Saudi-backed government in exile. An agreement between the two sides has been negotiated and is waiting for implementation. However, Washington is threatening to quash the tentative deal by placing the Houthis back on a terrorist organization blacklist. And then Dave DeCamp wrote this for antiwar.com that we now have 4 shipping giants who have decided not to have any more transit off the coast of Yemen for the time to come over the Houthi attacks. And last up here, the Pentagon reported downing a series of drones fired from Yemen. They said the USS Carney shot down 14 drones, and then a UK destroyer, the HMS Diamond, also claims to have shot down a single drone that was targeting merchant shipping. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning into the show today. Again, if you haven't already, please head over to the Libertarian Institute and make a donation to help support our end of the year fundraiser. Again, we're over halfway to meeting our goal, so help us wrap that up. Thank you so much.